Hi, Moses.
How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Not bad. Not bad at all, actually. How are you doing?
I'm all right. We are streaming out on this YouTube-y thing, so.
Hi, Moses.
Oh, how are you?
Oh, wait, you can't hear me. You're on the thing.
I can't.
Turning the volume on YouTube off, so.
I see we have Brandon here.
Yeah, it keeps saying that I'm trying to admit him, but I can't, he's not getting into the meeting for some reason. Now he's trying to log in twice.
There he goes.
Leave it to Castleton, right?
How you all been holding up? Did you have a good break?
I did. And you?
It was good. You know, we as you probably know, we released our decisions about
Mind you,
essentially
Moses,
a week later.
You are kind of going out live, so just be careful.
Oh yeah, I won't.
Okay.
Yeah, so we released our decisions a week later, which put us right up against the break. So it was kind of like this mad dash to get to break, and it was good to get there. So things were good.
Yeah, it seemed like things worked pretty well from your end.
Busy few weeks.
I didn't really notice a real lag in the decision making process from our end. We didn't. Things seemed pretty seamless.
Good. That makes me feel good.
So we do have. It's going. Sarah and I were just kind of talking about how the whole thing was going to work, and we'll kind of run it the way we have in the past. But I would expect that there will need to be kind of a bunch of COVID-oriented kinds of questions. Is that all right?
Bring it on. We're used to those at this point.
Okay.
My kids hopefully will.
Well, that makes it more real, bud.
I was going to say, hopefully they'll chill out a bit. And so, will folks be viewing this through YouTube, or will they be joining the meeting?
No, they'll be viewing it through YouTube.
Okay.
That way we keep kind of cameras to a minimum and oh, look, there's Brendan finally here. I don't hear him. I see him and his very nice background, and he's gone.
Yeah. My marketing team would disapprove of my background probably.
Yep. Hello, Diane. You're muted.
Hi. I was like, ooh, that lighting's not going to work. It was like all dark when I signed in. Let me move to better light.
So I reminded Moses, and I keep reminding myself, we are kind of streaming on YouTube presently. It was part of the getting the whole thing up and running. We kind of had to do it this way as we learn how to do this ourselves. So
don't say anything weird. I got it.
I keep telling myself that all the time. I'm weird enough as it is.
Good warning.
Hello,
Diane, I hope
Meg.
you're doing well.
Yes,
Meg?
yes. How are you?
Hi there.
Good.
I don't know if we'll have Brandon or not. He's been in and out a bunch of times, so.
Can you all hear me
Yes,
okay?
Sarah?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Oh,
Good.
I'm going to try to rename myself here. Let me see if I can.
something fun, I hope.
Well, I was just going to put Champlain in, but you never know. We'll see what happens.
The weird thing is that there's a 20-second delay between the Zoom meeting and what is being fed out onto YouTube. So at the moment, I'm hearing both. Which is,
That's a bit distracting.
which is, we were talking about how to set this thing up, and yes, it is a little bit distracting. All right, Nicole is here. Good evening, Nicole.
Hi there.
How are you?
Good.
Good to see you again. Oh, Brandon, maybe he's trying from a new computer and a new Wi-Fi hotspot. Brandon? Oh, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Live on YouTube and sideways.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
So
Oh,
is,
cool. There you
Oh,
go.
that was a bit of a cop-out with the avatar going on, Brandon. We liked seeing you set up your shop there.
oh no. I'm going to try to see if I can get a virtual background here so you don't have to see my closet that I'm currently in.
You might want to orient your phone so that you're not sideways.
Oh,
There,
was that
yeah.
not?
There you go.
Is that better?
That's perfect.
That's good.
Yay.
We're right side up now. Look at that.
It's like talking to my
Look.
parents over FaceTime.
Look at that. Yay.
It's a
I know
great
how to
view of
use
your
technology.
fan, Dad.
How's that look?
Wow, that's spiffy.
There we are.
So Brandon, the best I could do is kind of like this dark green plaid, almost
We're
Castleton
matching.
colored. Yeah.
We're matching. I appreciate that.
My daughter would not let me steal her Castleton hoodie. So
Fair enough. That's okay.
I'm sure it would fit for us.
what's that?
I'm sure it would fit.
No, I was going to use it as my background and she wouldn't let me bring it. All right, we want to get started, Sarah?
Yeah, I want to get started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how many do we have people watching? Wow, we have 80 people. That is fabulous. All right, everybody. So I feel like I'm actually doing like real TV. We are live.
We are all live.
Live in front of a black curtain in the dark CVU AV room. So Sarah and I are going to host tonight's evening, and it's different than the way we've done it in the past because everything has to be virtual. So Sarah's going to introduce herself with a mask because we can't be in the same room together without masks. Not only are there germs, but we're germy afraid people anyway. And then she's going to run and she's going to keep track of YouTube and all the questions from the audience because there is a chat feature. So if you have questions, feel free to dump them in the chat and we will get to them at the end. And Sarah and I will switch places at that point because she'll have all the YouTube questions and she can ask them to our panel. So we're going to let everybody introduce themselves. Then we're going to kind of go through the standard questions that we've developed over the years. Some seem to work better than others. We've weeded out the ones that don't work in favor of more COVID-oriented questions, I think. And then some of you all have volunteered to have a bit of a breakout session, and the links are posted in the YouTube description. If we get other links, if people want to host a breakout session like we have in the past, just make sure you email Sarah those links and she'll make sure we can get them in the YouTube description or somewhere so people can access them. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
You might need to take your headphones off or can you hear me if I speak right now? Can anyone hear me? Okay.
Oh, so Sarah.
Right now, is my sound available now? Okay, good. Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks so much for tuning into this. I know this is a different format that we've done in the past, but we're super excited that we can still host an event like this and have reps from 5 colleges be with us. I think you're going to get some great information from everyone speaking tonight. So I'm going to just let each rep from the 5 colleges introduce themselves and just let us know where you're from. And yeah, we'll start with that. So if we could just start with the first rep and actually, one of you just go ahead and begin. Let's start with Castleton.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Kennedy. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission at Castleton University. I'm an alum of Castleton, graduated back in 2014. Sorry that my profile is a little bit different. I'm on my phone right now, and I'm not sure how to mute myself, so I'll just remain quiet when I'm not called on. So thank you all so much for participating tonight.
Diane, you want to go next?
Sure thing. All right. My name is Diane Saboski. I'm the Director of Admission at Champlain College in Burlington, Vermont, and happy to be here.
Meg?
Everybody, my name is Meg O'Brien. I am one of the admissions counselors at St. Lawrence University. I'm a 2015 St. Lawrence grad, have been working in the office and with CVU ever since I graduated. I'm happy to be here and thanks for joining us.
Nicole, you seem to be next on my list.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Curvin. I'm the Dean of Admissions at Middlebury College here in Middlebury, Vermont. Happy to be with all of you and looking forward to answering questions.
And last but not least, Moses.
I won't hold that against you. Hello, folks. My name's Moses Murphy, Senior Associate Director of Admissions at the University of Vermont. I've been working at UVM for 16 years and primarily work with students who attend high school in Chittenden County and then kind of northern Addison County, but obviously to include students at CVU. So happy to be here and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great. All right. So, as I said, tonight's a bit of a departure. You know, I do enjoy an audience. I'm not any sort of great orator, but I like making my bad Indiana Jones, Rush, and Highlander jokes, and I just can't do that tonight. So the jokes already fall on deaf ears, and they're really deaf tonight, so it's a little bit hard to work with in that way. I appreciate everybody being flexible. As you know, COVID rules mean that tonight we're working with a new format. We're excited that we're still able to put this evening on. We really feel it is a benefit to our students. It's always been well received, and I greatly appreciate all the reps coming. As I said, we do have some typical questions that we're going to start with. Ask any questions that you might have in the chat feature on YouTube. Sarah's going to monitor that, and Sarah and I will switch at some point, and she'll kind of take over the YouTube based questions about halfway through, I would expect. So without further ado, the way I think we'll just do it is reps, as you hear a question and you want to chime in and answer, I'm not going to mute or unmute anybody's mic. It'll be like pass the mic in the other format. But we'll start with a big one. Sarah and myself and all the other counselors were always asked about what's happening with campus visits. What do they currently look like? What do you suggest students and families do about campus visits moving forward? And then in the past, we always had kind of these rapid fire questions, which were kind of fun, kind of Jeopardy style questions. I'm curious, as when you were seniors, how many campuses did you personally visit? And did you find those visits valuable? And we'll let Moses go first.
Thank you. So as far as what visits look like at University of Vermont, we have been fully virtual since, what was it, March 12th or 13th, and have, you know, at the time quickly pivoted and have since built out many virtual options available to students, and recognize that that's, you know, less than ideal. You know, I think, you know, the beauty of the college visit is getting on a campus and picturing yourself there and getting that sort of visceral gut feeling that helps you choose a college. And unfortunately, that can't be done at this point, and perhaps later. I don't foresee it this spring for us, but perhaps this summer we'll be able to invite people back on campus. But in its place, we have created, as I'm sure all my colleagues have, a plethora of virtual experiences both recorded, but also live, student panels, which, let's be frank, speaking with current students is always, I think, more important than hearing from the likes of people like me. But I think the key for all of you trying to navigate this process is the fact that the college visit, I think, serves a couple purposes in many cases, not all cases, but it's designed to help you get a sense or a feel for whether or not a school is right for you. But it also, I think, indicates to a school some level of interest. And I mention that only because, you have available to you at all these schools virtual options. And my encouragement to you would be to sign up for them formally. Go onto our websites, sign up for these virtual programs, recognizing that they're not as ideal. But I promise you will get information that you will find helpful, and that you will also sort of indicate to us that, some level of interest, even for schools that don't formally use demonstrated interest. And I believe we'll talk about perhaps that a little bit later on. I think that it can really benefit you to just kind of formally still go through the college search process, even though it's a little weird right now. So I'll let my colleagues jump in and add anything that they'd like.
How many schools did you visit, Moses?
I visited probably not a ton, 5 maybe. It was a while ago. I didn't apply to a bunch of schools. It wasn't. It seems like students. Well, that's how many I visited, about 4 or 5.
Does anybody want to add what campus visits look like in their campus?
Yeah, I'll add a little bit. We've had a lot of virtual visit opportunities as well. Honestly, it seems like every couple of weeks we're coming up with a new virtual visit offering, just kind of meeting more students at where they're at in the process and based on what their interests are. So, I mean, my recommendation is, as annoying as it can be, like, keep an eye on your email, because we are sending you updates on, new opportunities for you specific to interests that we know about. I would also say, like, check back on visit pages pretty regularly. If you check right now and see what the visit offerings are, it's probably going to look quite a bit different a couple months from now, just as schools have more things available, whether that's in person or virtual. St. Lawrence was really lucky to be able to offer both virtual and in-person visits on a small scale this past fall. Being a small campus community, and we were really lucky to, have a healthy campus community as well. We were able to open up a small number of visit opportunities. So we did have some people coming on for individual tours and things. And hopefully we'll get back to that in the spring once we get back into another semester routine. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a great chance. In the past, we didn't do anything virtually, to be completely honest. And so this is totally new for us, but I think it's a great opportunity too for you to visit so many more schools than you might be able to if it was just in-person visits. To go to St. Lawrence, it's going to take you probably about 3 hours in the car to get there from home. So you can cut out those 3 hours and probably knock out 3 virtual info sessions and visit 3 schools in those 3 hours rather than 1. So, it's a great way for you to weed out some schools pretty quickly. And also, like, if there's something you need to know that isn't covered in a virtual session, that's what we're here for, is to answer those questions on an individual basis as well.
And how many schools did you visit?
I visited way too many. I have an older brother who I tagged along to all of his college visits with my mom, and then it got to be my turn, and my mom said, all right, Meg, like, where do you want to go look at again that we visited with Greg? And I was like, I didn't really like any of those schools. I'm looking for something completely different, which I think she really despised that answer. But I did my own batch. I probably visited about a dozen schools in addition to the ones that I'd gone to with my brother. But probably, everybody has a different number. I probably visited more than I needed to and probably applied to more than I needed to. But, it's different for everybody.
All right. Who else wants to chime in? Or should I move on?
I would just echo that, Castleton's been pretty lucky too, where we were able to host a very small number of in-person visits this past fall. But right now, our campus is not open for in-person tours, but we have a really great online virtual tour. And I would just encourage every student to take an online virtual tour. As, kind of odd as they might seem, they're generally, hosted by a tour guide that's a student that can, answer some questions and share general information. So have fun with those. I mean, for me, this virtual platform has certainly, made us be more creative. So we have a lot of fun, I would say, online virtual events. As fun as you all might, fun is a relative term, I think, now for virtual, but we try to keep them fun, short, informative, so that you can gain a better knowledge. So definitely, keep an eye on that, but keep an eye on every school's visit calendar because they are changing quite frequently.
Cool. All right. So next question is going to be, what is the most important factor in a student's application? That's part one. And how many applications do you personally read each year?
And since I'm unmuted, I guess I can go first again. Let's see. So the most important factor in a student's application for Castleton is the whole application. We take a holistic approach when we're reviewing students. So, we're not only looking at a student's academic course rigor, their transcript, we're also looking at their letters of recommendation, if they have SAT or ACT scores to submit to us, which this year were test optional. And this is the first year that we've ever been test optional. So we're kind of learning about that and really valuing every piece of the application. One of my favorite parts of the application is the student's essay. I really enjoy reading students' essays. It gives me a chance to kind of get to know you as the applicant a little bit more and add a little depth to your application, to something that can be pretty generic otherwise. So it's really helpful for us to read those essays. And then how many applications do I read personally a year? Gosh, it varies. I have a pretty large territory in Vermont, so I have a lot of Vermonter applications, which is awesome. I would say this year I'm probably going to read close to 800 applications or more.
Yeah, I think each of us will have, slightly different variations on this answer. I think for Middlebury, first and foremost, we're looking for the academic experience and looking for scholars who have excelled in their coursework, have challenged themselves in the classroom, and have made efforts to really expand in directions that we think are supportive of what a liberal arts student would be interested in doing. So for us at the core, when I'm looking at applications, and in any given year, I'm probably reading 600 to 700 applications. The first place that we spend time is really the transcript. What courses has a student had access to? What's the school context? And how well have they performed in those areas? So that's one component. And certainly we're looking for students who will join a small community and invest in that community. So it's figuring out who they are in the classroom, who they are in their school community, who they are in their local and their family community. What things are important to the student, and the ways in which people who support them talk about their skills, talk about who they are and who they've been in high school. I think it's also really important for students and families to remember that we're not expecting that a student is fully formed, or that we're looking for a particular example of a specific thing every year. The most exciting thing for me is to watch applications come in, because these are individuals. These are students who are coming from a variety of different places around the world. And we're having a holistic conversation. As Brandon said, we're looking at every piece of the application. So in terms of priority, transcript, and then all of those supporting pieces, essay, which is the student's voice, experiences that students have had, and what a student chooses to tell us in the application. How have you put together all of these pieces to present yourself to folks who likely have not met you before?
Diane, I want to get to you.
Sure, yeah. I was going to say, it really varies school to school, and you're hearing a lot of that tonight, right, at various schools. I think a common theme that you're going to hear is that the transcript is the most important piece. And I think to all of us that academic match is, but to me, I always like to remind students that to admissions counselors, a transcript is more than just your GPA, right? So when we say that the transcript is the most important piece, you know, I have the benefit, luxury, I guess, of being able to train new admissions counselors on how to look at a transcript and see everything that it is, to see what school you go to and what that means about your background and where you're coming from and what kind of classes you were involved in, what kind of progression you took throughout your 4 years. Did you start in some classes that were really difficult for you, and did you really grow and blossom in those areas? Which subjects did you align yourself with more, and which subjects did you not like as much? Because we all have those, right? And so we're looking for all of this in the transcript. We're not just looking for the number at the bottom, right? The GPA. So I think it tells a lot about who you are as a person, what classes you enjoyed, what teachers you enjoyed. Sometimes there are teacher comments on there. There's all kinds of good information. So for me, that's really important because it paints, as Nicole was saying, the academic picture of who you're going to be. And then everything else really rounds out, and we try to see who you would be on our campus. If you're going to walk onto Champlain's campus, what role might you take? What kind of community member would you be? So that's really what we're looking for. But I always try to remind students of that, especially those right now who are saying, ooh, I wish my GPA was a little higher. The transcript tells so much more than just that number. So remember that.
All right, probably one of my favorite questions. Who do you like to see letters of rec from? How many should I get? And probably my favorite question of all time, what are the most letters of recommendation you've received for a single student? And do you like or dislike receiving more than the requested number of letters? This is a battle that at CVU, the school counselors, we talk to students about all the time, because we recognize how many applications you're reading. And when a school wants 2, maybe 1 letter of recommendation, and you're talking about sending 6, and you're reading, and the admissions counselors are reading 600 to 800 applications, that's a lot. So we try to encourage students to strike a healthy balance. And so I'm curious what your advice is around the letter of rec piece. And Diane, since you're up, if you want to start, feel free, and then maybe Moses and Meg or something like that.
Sure. So I've worked at a few different institutions in my career in admissions, and I'll tell you the funniest letter of recommendation I ever got was from someone's 6-year-old brother who wrote a letter of recommendation for him. And obviously someone had to help him, but it included like, please take him because I will get my own room, right? And all of these things. So that was my favorite letter of recommendation, I think. But, you know, I would ask people to think about, if you want to send letters in addition to what is required by the institution, think about what the purpose and what the benefit of those letters would be. So I think all admissions counselors are absolutely willing to read an extra letter or 2 of recommendation. When there start being multiple in there, then you're kind of not as excited about reading all of those, especially if they're not saying different things, right? So think about what are we learning about you as an applicant? And if everyone's saying the same things over and over, we don't need to read 12 of those, right? So I really would encourage you to think of somebody who knows you in a different way, in a different light than maybe one of the teachers that you asked, and think about what is the benefit? What is this going to add to my application? What is the reader going to learn about me that they don't already know in my file? Because that's really what's important to us. In terms of most application letters I've ever received, this is, again, outliers, really atypical, but I read a file years ago that must have had over 25 letters in it. Every person that this student knew, she just thought, like, an alumni who she had never met, but knew they went to this institution, I'm going to get them to write a letter, which basically says, I don't know this girl, but, you know, she wrote to me. Like, that's not helpful. So don't do that. But yeah, think about, you know, in what context people know you and what that will add to your application would be my advice.
Moses or Meg?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't add a ton to that. I think it's about being thoughtful and strategic. And I think that what you have to be mindful of is the fact that, you know, if you overwhelm the process with these letters of recommendation, what you do is you take away from those people who can speak best to your strengths and to your qualities and to your fit with the institution. And frankly speaking, I don't think I've ever read a negative letter of recommendation. So having 12 people tell us how great you are, at some point there's not the value add that you were probably hoping for. I think it's better to be strategic about, who can speak to your strengths, or who is that teacher in the course maybe that you struggled in, but you showed perseverance and grit. I don't think that it's necessary to sort of overwhelm the process with, too many letters of recommendation. The most off the top of my head, I don't know, but 12, 15, 20. I mean, you do get applicants that just submit a lot. And again, it all gets reviewed. It just stops moving the needle at a certain point, I would say.
It must be bath time at the Murphy house. Meg, do you want to chime in with anything, or should I move on?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just quickly, I would say one piece of advice is don't save your recommendation request for the last minute. Every school has those teachers that are kind of the favorite teachers that are probably going to get asked for a ton of recommendation letters. If you're a junior right now, this is a great time to start thinking about who are some of the teachers that you've connected with, or mentors you've connected with. And maybe the end of your junior year is a good time to put that on their radar. At CVU might have specific time zones when they encourage students to do this, but I would say just don't save it for the last minute. As the others have said, think about how can the various experiences that might show up throughout your application, how can those be addressed through various recommenders? So for example, the other day I was reading an application from a girl who had gone to 2 very different high schools. And she transferred after her freshman year. And her first school that she went through throughout middle school was an independent school, very experiential, a very different environment from her much larger public high school. So one of her additional rec letters was from someone from that school that she went to in middle school through 9th grade. And so that spoke to a totally different experience. I would also say, think about your recommenders don't necessarily have to be the teachers that you've done the best in their classes. Sometimes I'll see on an application a student really struggled with one specific class or subject area. And for the rest of the application, I'm honestly trying to sort out, okay, what was the source of that challenge? How did that student work through that challenge? And so if you can get a teacher from a class where you really struggled, but you put in a lot of effort to try and improve, balance one of your teacher recs with that teacher, and then maybe another teacher rec is from one of those classroom areas where you really excel, you feel really comfortable, you're more comfortable contributing to the class discussions, all of those types of things. So just think about the ways in which your rec letters can differ from one another, and that's really kind of the best path forward.
Yeah, one of the best letters of rec that I read from a teacher was for a student who actually got a C- or a D in a class, but it was able to speak to how hard the student worked to grasp information that was really the student was just not comfortable with. And it spoke volumes about what skills the student was going to bring onto campus. So I appreciate all those answers. Thank you. So I think we're going to step into a few questions specific to kind of the COVID era, and I don't know if they're easy or hard, but students are always hearing about demonstrated interest, and what does that look like from an admission counselor's perspective currently? How do you measure demonstrated interest kind of in this COVID era? Nicole, do you want to start perhaps?
Sure. So I think just for an overview, as you're thinking about looking at different colleges and universities, this is one of those things that you should ask about. There are institutions that factor in how much contact you've made with the school over the last few months or over the last couple of years. Middlebury doesn't use that in the assessment of applications, but we certainly do know if you've come to a virtual visit and hopefully down the road are able to come to campus in person again. And that's something that's really helpful to know as schools are really evaluating you. What are the factors that are important to schools and what things will be in that sort of pot of information that they'll use to make an evaluation. So demonstrated interest will look different in a lot of different places. I guess my recommendation, given where we are with COVID, is if there are schools that you're interested in and that you've attended some info sessions or student panels, or you've made contact with a faculty member because there's an academic department that really speaks to you, that you should reach out and, you know, have a conversation or send an email. We all get lots of emails from prospective students expressing interest or asking good questions, right? If there are things that you're curious about that you didn't take away from the info session or you didn't take away from a panel that we offered, I think that's an important thing to move forward and move towards as you're sort of demonstrating your interest. You know, I think it's important for you to think too, as you're building a college list, about the ways in which you demonstrate that interest. So, you know, the preference certainly in other institutions I've worked at where we considered demonstrated interest was to make sure that that was coming from the student, that the student was doing the initial outreach, asking those questions, you know, making the inquiries, sending information directly from them to the college, because this is where that handoff starts to happen, where you're going to need to complete the application, you're going to need to write the essay. And if you have a question about an essay question that a college has, or whether interviews are required, and that's not something that you could clearly glean from the website, that we expect that it comes from you as the student. So as you're thinking about demonstrated interest, ask the schools kind of how they factor that in, and then think about the ways in which you're demonstrating interest. I would say, similar to sort of the letters of recommendation and the overwhelming number, I think that at a certain point, you know, making a few contacts with a college office and reaching out to an admissions counselor who might be reading from your territory is important. I'm not sure that things like weekly updates about what you're up to are necessary and useful. I think it's important to make contact maybe with the person who might be reading your application, or ask a question of a student ambassador or someone in the office, but don't feel like you need to then keep that sort of constant contact about, you know, you got this test back and you did well, or you just volunteered your time with this virtual event. Just be mindful of the ways in which you're making that contact.
Awesome. Does anybody have anything they want to add, or should I just move on? I'm moving on. Brandon's mic is unmuted and he didn't respond, so I'm moving on. So this question has come up, and I'm really curious to hear from some of the schools who were not previously test optional. So what does test optional mean? Are you still able to submit test scores? Are you penalized for not submitting test scores? And what is used in place of test scores? And kind of, you know, we're really curious how the process has gone this year for some of you for whom test optional is a new kind of thing in the admissions process.
Sure, I can talk about that because Castleton was never, historically, we were not test optional. We always required either a student submit SAT or ACT scores to complete their application. And this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we really needed to look at what our prospective students needed. And, you know, trying to sign up for an SAT or an ACT was just another level of stress that our students did not, you know, we didn't feel like they should have to go through. So we made the switch to test optional. All of our programs are test optional now. When the pandemic had originally started, we were still requiring test scores for nursing programs because that's our most selective program that we have. But now everything is test optional. That is for this year only. Our faculty assembly are currently meeting about this, and they're discussing it as far as if they want to continue to be remain test optional or not. I think it's beneficial for students that have test anxiety, and you know, their transcript can show that their course foundation is strong enough and they're, you know, ready for it. But I think in some cases, the test scores can enhance a student's profile, and that's why we did require them. This year, I think it's going pretty well for students. It's helping them complete their application a little bit quicker and getting a quicker admission decision, which everybody likes. And, I think it's alleviated that stress of feeling like I need to get into an SAT or an ACT test, even though I didn't have the foundation or couldn't complete my test prep course. So I'm pretty happy with it, and I think my colleagues are as well. We're anxious to make that decision for moving forward, whether or not we will remain test optional or not, but that should be coming out here shortly. I think that kind of answers it, right, Russ?
Yep. Who else wants to chime in? Maybe Moses, or I hate to call on Nicole again.
Yeah. So we have always, well, I shouldn't say always, in my, again, 16 years, we've always required test scores, and for the same reasons as everybody else, went test optional. And I think that, the first thing I would say, and Nicole talked about, and I think Brandon did as well, this idea of a holistic review process, which is, in some ways a buzz term, but is the reality of this process, and that we're looking at all the components of your application and using that information to make our decision. So in the absence of test scores, it just puts extra emphasis and weight on those other components of your application, your performance, your strength of schedule, your extracurricular activities and involvement, your letters of recommendation, your essay. And I think the main thing that I have noticed is, this idea of students understanding what that means to be test optional. So on the application, you need to tell us if you're sending us scores or not. And if you say you're not, then we're not going to use scores. If you can't change your mind after a decision, or if you didn't like your scholarship or something of that nature. And more importantly, if you say you are sending us scores, we're going to wait till we get them. And I think that students, what we found in the early action round was students said they're going to send scores, and then for whatever reason decided they weren't, and in many cases couldn't take the test that they thought they were going to take, and just assumed, well, it doesn't matter because they're test optional. And we sent them emails and text messages saying, hey, you're incomplete. And then we released decisions, and it's like, wait a minute, why didn't I get a decision? Well, so it is a decision. You have to know what you're going to do, and you have to be thoughtful about it. And then you have to understand what the policies are and the deadlines. At UVM, we have selected dates by which you need to lock in your testing plan. If you said that you were going to send us scores, or you said you aren't, there is a limited amount of time for us to review these applications and make these decisions, and these scholarships and these honors college decisions and everything else. And so you kind of have to pick a lane. And I appreciate the difficulty that you all are in because of the unavailability of tests. But you kind of have to, it's just one other thing you got to kind of think about strategically and understand what each school is requiring of you and what it means. For students that don't send us test scores, they're at no disadvantage, meaning that they are still considered for scholarship and honors college and everything else. But it is two different pipelines. It's two different for us, two different processes that we're going through from the operational standpoint, from the review standpoint, scholarship and everything else. So know that it matters, and know that if you don't, that's totally fine. It just means that those other components of your application take on additional weight. As far as next year, like Brandon, we've made a recommendation to our faculty senate and the president and the board of trustees. It's shocking how difficult, I shouldn't say difficult, it's shocking how, this decision is one that isn't made by me or my director. It's a university decision. It takes time. I wouldn't want to say one way or another what I anticipate will happen. But I know that it's certainly under consideration is that we remain next year as a school that will not require test scores.
Yeah, I would just add a couple things. So Middlebury made the decision to go test optional for a 3-year period of time. When we recall March and what things were happening in March and how difficult and uncertain it was, whether students would even have access to testing, and what the testing would look like. We really felt that one of the components that we could remove and feel like we can still do a holistic review was standardized testing. And we did it for 3 years because we felt like there was great uncertainty about just how long things were going to last. And the other thing is that I think, as an institution, we spent a lot of time really thinking about how we're going to evaluate students with or without testing. And how do we create a system that doesn't disadvantage one or the other? So from March until November 1st, when our early decision process started, we were practicing and reviewing and assessing previous applications and looking at the differences with and without testing, so that we could be sure that we felt confident that we were ready to review applications. Middlebury was also moving in the direction of going test optional at the time anyway. And so this just sort of pushed this up a little bit and made it more current for us moving forward. And I can say, as we've already gone through one round of applications, we feel really good and confident that we've assessed students in the ways that they would like to be assessed in the application process. And so if a student felt like testing was something that was important to them and something that would add to their application, great, and we accepted that. For students who chose not to submit testing, we didn't ask why, we didn't make any assumptions, and we reviewed, as I said, the core, which is the transcript, how well a student's doing, and all of those supporting materials. I do think, institutions will continue to think about going test optional for the long term. But again, things are pretty up in the air. So that's another thing that you should, be thinking about as you're building a college list and you're trying to figure out what that balance is. But I would say that, our first priority was health and safety, and we didn't feel it was really appropriate for us to expect students to drive 3 states over or to get on a plane to take a standardized test when we felt confident that in the application process, we could assess students with the information that we had at that point.
All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, how might you evaluate a transcript from a student who struggled during their freshman or sophomore year, possibly even earning a failing grade in a class, but is doing really well currently? How is this sort of transcript interpreted? And we'll go with maybe Meg and Diane to start and see if anybody has anything to add after they go.
Yeah, I think as Diane said before, the transcript is more than just your GPA. And so we're spending a lot of time diving into those details of how have you performed over your years in high school, what classes have you chosen to take, what challenges have you taken on in various subject areas, what has that progress looked like over the years, not just this is their final GPA, that's all I need to know, move on to the next thing. So, if you had a rough start to high school can be a big transition for some students. That's okay. We're just looking for how have you in turn come up with new strategies and practices to improve in certain areas that have been more challenging. So yeah, a lower start definitely is still seen and considered and carries some weight, but honestly, I love to see those success stories of the students who have really diligently worked hard throughout the 4 years of high school to show a steady improvement. I think that's, just as exciting as a student who has totally aced all 4 years. That sense of growth is something that we're really looking for. I think it shows a sense of ownership over your academic experience, which is going to be really valuable when you get to your college experience as well. If there's ever something you feel like you need to explain about your trend throughout 4 years of high school, take the time to explain it or talk to your guidance counselor about, is this something that you plan to address in your rec letter? Or just make sure there's some explanation there if it's needed. On the Common App, for example, there's an entire section called the additional info section. It follows up your essay. I see students frequently use that space to explain maybe a blip in their transcript, especially if there's personal information or experiences that relate to that. That clarity is always incredibly helpful. The more that we can know and understand about your academic experience, that's going to be the best for us moving forward. Also, obviously, the past, this fall semester and your spring of last year were heavily impacted by COVID. There's also on the Common App this year a community disruption section where you can talk about the individual impacts of COVID on your experience as well. I've seen students use that very effectively. So just make sure you're advocating for yourself as if there is something to explain.
Yep, I agree 100% with what Meg said. What I would add too is that it probably is better to give context than to just leave it to the imagination of the admissions counselor, right? Not that we make up fantastic stories as we're reading this, but we have no idea. We have no idea what happened in that class. So, Meg mentioned that there are spots often on an application, whether that's the Common App or the application that a school has. You can email your counselor. I would actually recommend that you do that. At most schools, you're going to have an admissions counselor that is assigned to you based off where you live or your last name or some area, right? You'll be able to find this online. If not, email the general admissions office and say, who can I talk to about this? And that's a great person to reach out to and say, I'd really like to talk to you about some trends on my application. Do you offer interviews? Can I speak with you? If a school or college offers interviews, take that opportunity. I know that seems scary. I know, especially as a high school student, I didn't like doing them. My mother made me do them. But it's a great opportunity to fill in those blanks and to tell more stories. And if there's something you're nervous about, like a blip on your transcript or a grade that wasn't what you want it to be, meet with your guidance counselor, meet with someone and practice the way that you're going to talk about it, right? So what we're not going to do is call an admissions counselor and say, I had this teacher and she was terrible and it's her fault that I have an F, right? That's not what we're going to do. We're going to instead say, I had this teacher and we didn't really align. It was very difficult for me to figure out what was expected of me. I was learning, I was growing. This is what I learned through the process, right? So, we're evaluating you to come to our college or university, to be an adult, to take classes, to own up to things. And so I think part of this is you to do some self-reflection and introspection on what went wrong and what did I learn from that, right? And that's what you tell the counselor. So I think it's really important to think about that too, rather than just saying, well, I didn't really care about school then and now I do. Well, there's a different way to phrase that, right? And so talk with your counselor, talk with your parents, talk with your friends, and think about it to yourself too. What did I learn from that experience? And now I'm doing great in all of my classes. So definitely think about that. And that's what you want to share.
Other additions? All right, I'm going to ask a question about the essay. And I'm curious what your favorite essay topics have been, and what are some of the key messages to speak to in the essay, and then where the essay ranks in the overall application process for a student. And Sarah's trying to get my attention, so I'm going to go speak to her while somebody is answering the question.
I can speak up, seeing as I've just left myself unmuted this whole time. The essay, I think, is, it's a really important part of the application process for us at Castleton, where we're a school that really looks at every piece of the application pretty equally. We really value the essay. It's a great chance for the student to talk about their academic experience, maybe a personal experience that they grew from, maybe something that they had some challenge with that they needed to overcome. And that can add some real depth to the student's character, their perseverance, their ability to, rise up to a challenge. And we really value that. I think my favorite essay or essay topic that I ever wrote or read about was, I had a student, this is a little while ago, wrote about a paperclip, and they talked about this paperclip and how they're, right out of the box, they're pretty rigid and they're meant to serve this one purpose. But if you start messing with a paperclip and moving it around, you can shape it into something, pretty creative and unique. And then they compared themselves to a paperclip. And I thought that was a really great way to talk about themselves and not just, be so blunt with talking about themselves, but show some creativity, and I really appreciated that. And yeah.
I think my favorite essay topics are ones where the student voice comes through and it's very authentic, right? So I've read some very funny essays, and I've read some essays where people who aren't naturally funny try to be funny in their essay, and those aren't as good, right? And then you read some really, touching ones and heartwarming stories because people are really speaking to you from an experience that they had. And then you read essays about people that try to force that, and that doesn't work as well, right? And so what I would say is that, think about a lot of different topics, start jotting down ideas about what you could write about. You may have to write more than one essay, and you may have to start an essay and then say, this isn't really working. I'm going to try a different topic, right? And one that I really feel passionate about, that I want to write about. Because if you really care about the topic and you're writing in your own voice and you're writing something that you care about and you want to tell us about, to me, that's going to be a better essay than whatever topic you think admissions counselors want to hear. And I'm going to try to fit my personality to match that. We read a lot of these applications, as we mentioned earlier, so we can tell when you're trying to shape yourself into an unnatural way to reshape yourself into a paperclip or something, right? So, sometimes it works easily and it fits, and other times you're forcing it. Don't force it. That would be my advice.
I'm curious to get everybody's perspective. Meg?
I'll add like one little like tip or strategy that I heard recently. A friend of mine has been doing some independent college counseling, helping students work through the application process. And recently she had a student that she's working with sent her a draft of her essay, which was about this like really strenuous canoe trip that she went on with a summer camp. And the essay was meant to have like some moments of humor, as Diane was just talking about. It totally fell flat. There was no emotion. It was this big accomplishment. And my friend read the essay and was like, there's no personality to this. And she said, I want you to put down this essay. The next time they met, she said, put down the essay. Just tell me the story of that canoe trip. Like as if you were telling your friend this story of this experience that you had. And once she told this story, there is so much more emotion and personality to it, so much more authenticity. And so, you don't want your essay to be super casual, maybe not have the same lingo that you would use if you were telling a friend, but make sure it still carries that emotion and like that element of storytelling. And probably what you gain from that experience is going to come out a little bit more clearly if you think about telling it or approaching it in that way. So just a little tip that I heard recently that I thought was a nice approach.
Moses?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that I have a favorite topic. I have a lot of favorite essays, but they all tend to be about different things, and what make them powerful are the things that Meg and Diane have talked about being authentic and about being, planful. In other words, to obviously not wait, and save this sort of exercise for the last minute. And again, don't write what you think I want to hear, or don't picture me when you're writing it. Whatever topic you've chosen, you want to think about the ways in which it's going to add to your candidacy, and then be authentic about the topic. I've read great essays about the time you won or lost the state championship. I've also read, obviously a lot of essays about that, but if it is authentic and if there is a story to tell, and if it adds to your candidacy, or if it addresses something, the topic matters less. I think it's about being truthful to who you are and why you are a fit for this institution. There are some people who have circumstances that they need to address, or difficulties that they have overcome, or otherwise have kind of a go-to topic. But for most of us, that's not the case. And so you really want to just be, again, like Megan and Diane said, you want to be authentic to the voice you are putting on paper and to your candidacy, I think is my advice.
Nicole, do you have anything?
Yeah, I would just add one thing, which I think, I don't have favorite topics because I've read so many different essays about everything you can think about athletics and personal challenges and experiences and funny things that have happened to students along the way. The only thing I would just add is that really center it on you. I often read essays about how family members have impacted you, or a friend or a coach, and you really have to bring it to you. You have to circle it back and appreciate all that that person has given you. But this is the only point really in the application where we hear your true voice. You know, you write a letter of extracurricular activities, you make that list, you're organizing the application materials and pulling it all together. But here's an opportunity for you to speak. And it really has to be about you. I know it's hard to do the sort of self-promotion and to talk about yourself. But it's really important to think about this is that I think, as Meg said, you know, you're telling us something, right? I think it's also just lastly important to think about everything else that's in your application and then add to that. Don't duplicate, don't, you know, if we know that you've spent a lot of time doing a particular sport, maybe shift a little and talk about some other different aspect of your life so that we get a really well-rounded picture of who you are. Because it's an opportunity, and sometimes I think students miss that opportunity because they pile on to one thing in the application and they lose sight of the fact that there's some other interesting things happening that we would love to hear more about.
Yeah, and my additions to this topic are at CVU, our juniors, all of you juniors that are watching and will watch, you all have writing prose class. And one of the essays that you will write in writing prose is they will look at all of the essay prompts in the Common App, and your teacher will work with you on crafting that college essay. And we find as school counselors, we figure roughly 70 to 80% of our students use kind of the foundation that they started in writing prose on that essay, that becomes their Common App essay. And we've seen it really take some of the stress, a lot of the stress out of that application period and meeting that November 1st deadline, because it's been written in school with people who are going to assist you in keeping your voice in that essay and not over proofreading it and some of the things that you've heard the reps talk about today. And all of the school counselors, Sarah, Julie, Jen, Naomi, myself, Susie, it doesn't matter which school counselor you have, we all really enjoy helping students with the essays. Some of us have strength in grammar usage and mechanics, and others have strength in kind of finding the heart of an essay and helping students kind of navigate that process is something that we all enjoy. And personally, you know, I've done this for 20 plus years, and of several, the one essay that really stands out is the student who wrote about how they organize the books in their room, and specifically why Flowers for Algernon and Winnie the Pooh are shelved next to each other. You know, their shelving system is not alphabetical or by Dewey Decimal System or by series, it's by which main characters would be friends. And so when we got feedback from some of the colleges on that, it was really interesting to hear how admissions reps read that essay and how much it told them about, as Nicole and everybody else has said, about the applicant. You know, what they read, how they synthesize that stuff. So it was really kind of a powerful essay. It's one that I remember. So a couple quick last ones. And I want to lump them into one question because I'm trying to be cognizant of time, and I want to make sure that if people have questions, to please write them in the chat feature on YouTube so that we can ask your specific questions. But every year as school counselors, we get asked, do schools waive admissions requirements if a student's 504 IEP kind of excuses them from or makes accommodation for certain classes? And I'm thinking specifically of world languages, and also kind of wanting to tag in, does American Sign Language count as a world language? So do you ever waive an admissions requirement
And for world language, if there's an admissions requirement, does something like world language or American Sign Language take its place? And I don't know who wants to start, but.
I'll jump on that one. So at Middlebury, we have suggested curriculum and what we like to see. We don't actually have any sort of things that we would completely discount an application because we didn't see that in that context. We do count ASL as a language for students. And what we're really looking at is what a student had access to in the curriculum, what they took, and then anything else that impacted the direction they took academically. So we make suggestions that we'd like to see, academic courses throughout the full 4 years of high school, no letting out, or slowing down in senior year, thinking about rigor and keeping to build on that. But we don't ever sort of say to students or have anything out there that says that if you're missing this one thing, you shouldn't apply to Middlebury. These are suggestions about curriculum. And, we see curriculum that looks very, very different across the board. We have schools that have no grades. We have schools that have their own grading system. We have schools that have only written evaluations and have different expectations of their students. There are schools without AP courses at all, and they have their own advanced level courses that they work towards, or an IB program. So really, it's important to think about moving forward and moving through rigor. It is, again, one of those questions that you need to ask of the individual institutions that you're looking at, because if you're applying to certain kinds of majors, then there are going to be requirements. They're going to expect a math and science if you're looking at particular types of majors. But for Middlebury, we have a suggested course of study that we like to see in terms of the courses that students are taking.
Anybody want to add to that? Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it.
I'll jump in just because UVM does have required courses. As I think probably many of you know, UVM is made up of 7 individual schools and colleges, and each of those schools and colleges will have different minimum entrance requirements related to coursework that you have to have taken in high school. And they differ based on what Nicole kind of alluded to. The engineering school has different requirements than our liberal arts college. But university-wide, all students are required to have 2 years at a minimum of the same foreign language, recognizing that students often who are successful in the evaluation process are going to present beyond those minimum requirements. I will say that we will waive that requirement for students who have some sort of 504 plan or otherwise documented LD that would allow for them to be excused from that requirement. We do include American Sign Language in those requirements. So that's how we approach it specific to world languages.
Any other additions? All right. I'm going to get to kind of some of at least one of those rapid fire questions that I really like. And that is, when you were applying to schools, how many schools did each of you apply to? And what is the correct number of schools a student should apply to? Moses, I'm starting with you.
The correct number, I think, is a personal question, meaning that it's, I think the perfect number is going to be different for each person. But I think that at the heart of the question is this idea that if you do correct and proper research and you think about this strategically, there's very little need to apply to 10, 12, 15, 20 schools. I'm sure somebody on the call probably, the common application always puts out the highest number of, they do limit it, I believe. But you do have students who overdo it, I guess is the point. And I think that if you're thinking about this strategically, you want to think about those schools from an admissibility standpoint that are your reach and your your expected acceptances and then some safety acceptances. You also want to think about it from a financial standpoint in the same light. And I would say that your school counseling office would be your best resource for kind of trying to get a feel for that. They've been doing this for a long time. They know us well. And so I think that you just want to be thoughtful is the key takeaway. And if you're being thoughtful, I have a hard time believing that you would be applying to more than 6 or 8 schools. I'm going to look silly now when one of you said you applied to 12 and I implied that you weren't thoughtful. Sorry, Meg. No, I'm sure you were. But I myself, I applied to 1 school. Don't do that. If you don't get in, you're in trouble. And so you want to make sure you have options, both from an admissibility standpoint and from a financial standpoint, I think would be my main takeaway.
So that was a bit of a trick question, which Moses, you caught on to right away. Diane, how many schools did you apply to?
I was thinking, it's been a while. I don't know exactly. I would guess it's about 12. And the reason for that was that I had planned on narrowing down my list. And I didn't say this earlier, but when you asked about how many schools we visited, I didn't visit a single school before I applied. Circumstances out of my control. We had a situation in the family, someone got sick. We had to cancel our visits that fall. And so I applied to more schools because of that, because I knew I had to narrow them down in the spring. So I say that only to say that I too had circumstances beyond my control where I couldn't visit before I applied. It worked out. I ended up at a school that I loved, that I ended up being my class president at, and I'm on the alumni council, right? Like everything will be okay for you all, even if you can't visit schools right now. The only other piece of advice I would give with that is a couple of schools ended up on my list because I was dead set on one school. This is where I knew I wanted to go. And it was my favorite school, even though I'd never visited. And people said to me, if you're looking there and you like that, what do you like about it? And when I told them, they said, oh, if you like that, you should look at these other ones. One of the other ones that they only recommended because I liked this one was where I ended up and where I just loved. And it ended up blowing the other one out of the water. So pay attention to what it is you like about a school and try to find other schools that share similar attributes, because those might be good ones to have on your list.
Meg, you gave it away earlier. I think you said 12. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely like a few, I would say just unnecessary ones. I mean, now like we give application fee waivers when somebody visits our campus. So, I'm sure there are people who apply just because they have a fee waiver and like they add it to their list on their Common App. But I would say like take some time too to think about, if you're admitted to this school, is it a place that you realistically want to go? It's about saving that time and resources and money too, because applying to schools can get expensive. But yeah, I mean, it totally varies for everybody. It kind of depends on where you're at in your search as well. I know my visits to schools after I was admitted, those visits were so much more telling to me than even if I had visited them before I had applied. You just see it in such a different light when you can actually say, oh, I can be here if I want to be here. That can really change your perception. So take some stock of like where you're at in your search and how certain you are of the search criteria you have in front of you, when you're also thinking about, where is it realistic and worthwhile for you to apply to.
Brandon?
I think I applied to 6 schools. And I think that's like the sweet spot. Like Moses said earlier, be thoughtful with your research. Envision yourself at these campuses. If you can't get out there and visit like right now, it's very challenging. Visit after and, apply. Maybe you'll apply to a few more, but I would say be really thoughtful with how many applications you put out. I'm the type of person where if I have more options, it's going to be really hard for me to make a decision. So if you have a ton of acceptances and you have to choose and narrow it down, it just can get overwhelming and confusing. So be mindful with those applications.
Nicole?
Yeah, I'm similar with 6, and I think I would, certainly piggyback on what Brandon said. I think when I was looking at schools, I wanted to have a range of places that, distance from home and the types of programs they offered. But for me, I wanted to just be sure that I didn't get completely overwhelmed by similar choices that felt like I could go either way. And it really was a life experience of saying, okay, I have this in front of me. I have to decide how many I want to apply to. And, you know, hopefully I'm going to get some acceptances here. And I don't want to be too overwhelmed by that process. I don't want to find myself in a position where I've applied to very different schools and there are really a lot of different considerations in that mix. Try to give yourself a little bit of a break and be thoughtful about the schools that you're applying to, but also remember that, you know, you are going to have to make some decisions at the end of the process. And so whether to visit those schools you've been admitted to, or whether you want to be just that far away from home as you thought you wanted to be, make sure that you're thoughtful about the fact that what are you going to do with all of this information once you get to that point in the process too.
All right, I think I was 6. And before I turn it over to Sarah, I totally forgot at the very beginning to go over some really important dates. We talked about testing. We are giving the PSAT here at CVU to all juniors on the 26th. That information is in daily announcements and Adams celebrations and on the Direction Center website. So you should get a picture of what the day is going to look like for the 26th. Typically you're here around 8 and out of here by 12:30. Next week will be ad drop for juniors. And other 9th and 10th graders. And the process will be much the same as it has been previously this year. Well, there'll be a Google form emailed out with classes listed that have space. Semester 2 begins on the 28th. I don't know if Sarah has any questions about a school day SAT next year. Has not been decided. We don't know if we're doing it. That information is quite fluid and you'll get information pretty much as soon as we get it. Scheduling for 21 and 22 is going to look different for this school year. And it will be coming out probably sometime after February break. We're going to be using a new student management system, probably doing something different. We're always trying to refine the process of choosing classes. I talked about writing prose. Semester 2 is usually when the school counselors start meeting with juniors and starting the process of helping them find schools that they might be interested in so that they're not applying to 28 schools like I had a student do once. And so we use Naviance at CVU, and there's a pretty dynamic search feature in Naviance that allows students and families to really refine their searches based on some CVU specific information, because we've used that piece of software for many years. And so we have a lot of historical data in it that can really help students target some of those, as I think it was Moses who talked about kind of those reach schools, those safe schools, and those target schools. So those were the pieces that I forgot to give everybody earlier, and I apologize for doing it at the end. I saved almost the best for last. I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, who has the YouTube questions.
Russ, don't leave 1 second. Okay. Just want to get back into where I have to be. Oh, here. Here.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I want to make sure I'm doing this right. So hopefully I can manage this now on my own. Okay. Hi. So there are just a couple questions so far that I've received from the audience, and I just want to make time to ask these. One of the questions is, what are the pros and cons to applying early decision? Does someone want to take time to answer that question? Anyone?
Well, I'm happy to jump in since we've just come through our first round of early decision. I think, as I've said over the course of the evening, you're making choices about what's best for you academically, what institution you feel a connection to. Early decision is a binding agreement, which means that you've done all of your research and you've found the place that you feel like you want to call at your academic home for the next 4 years. Many of the deadlines for early decision are in November. And if you're someone who needs a little bit more time in the process and feels like you need more options on the table, it can be a challenge to kind of pull yourself together, do all of that research and be ready to go, November 1st, November 15th, depending on what those deadlines are. The huge upside is certainly that, your college search is over if you're admitted through that program to that institution, and you can, live through the rest of your senior year without, sort of going through the process and completing, those visits after the fact with multiple schools. But I get this question so much, and I always turn it back to the family or to the student and say, have you been thoughtful about your college search, and do you feel ready to make a choice about an institution which says you're committing to that one institution? If you feel like you need options, and there are many great options, including early action, which is not binding, and you want to get some acceptances under your belt to feel that confidence, that you're going to go, off to college next year, and you want to kind of move through the process in November and you're ready to go, have at it. But I think, you have to be really thoughtful about where you're applying early decision and why. I have often heard from school counselors that sometimes students will come in and say, I need to apply somewhere early. And that is completely the wrong way to approach your college search when you're thinking about where you can be fulfilled and where you can have a positive experience. It should be about, I'm interested in this institution, they have an early decision program, and I think this is the place that I want to, go through that process. So just be thoughtful about it. I think it's an individual choice. It's not right for every student. And there are tremendous institutions out there, 4,000 plus institutions to choose from. And many of them don't have, early decision programs or early entrance programs. And you'll find wonderful experiences at all of those places.
Thank you. One other question, will there be any new opportunities in the application because of the changes from COVID? For example, a digital portfolio? And I imagine it might be hard at this point to answer a question like that with all the unknowns. And I didn't know if any of you had some insight at this point.
I mean, I think some things that first come to mind, like I mentioned earlier, the Common App has a new section for a community of disruption. So that's one change that we're already seeing this year. I would say there are just more and more opportunities for students to connect with us through a lot of virtual platforms and through actual live events. We do all of our interviews online now. We offer more of them now. So there are those additional opportunities that have come up through this situation. I would say other things like a digital portfolio, that's going to really vary from school to school. What I always say to students is that if there is something that's really important to you that isn't captured in your application, find a way to convey that to us, find a way to send that to us. We'll always accept something like an art portfolio, or a recording of a student singing, or a recording of their athletic performance or something like that. If they want us to see something additional that isn't easily conveyed through text on an application, at St. Lawrence, we welcome that, but there are going to be different ways that different schools utilize those types of things in their process, and different ways and that they accept those materials. But those are just some of the first things that come to mind.
Thanks. And one question that just, and I know we are running over time, that I don't think we got that was answered. Quick question: do you have a language requirement at your school? I know that was a question that gets asked quite a bit by parents. If you could just all go through and just kind of a yes or no. Do you have a language requirement at your school? Not at the college level, but prior to entering, I mean, is there a language admissions requirement for high school, as one of the requirements to getting into your college?
At Castleton, we don't have a language requirement, but we do encourage a student to take at least 2 years of a world language if possible.
There's no requirement at Champlain to take a language prior.
Yeah, we don't have an official requirement. We have suggested curriculum.
We like to see 3 years, but in the total understanding that can vary by student to student, and also to address that earlier question, we will accept ASL as one of those.
Ah, okay.
We do, as I mentioned earlier, have a requirement.
Language requirement. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being part of this panel. We really, really appreciate all of the information you provided for families and students. And I know some of you did provide a link. So for families, it is on the right side of the chat in YouTube. So hopefully you can access that. And again, thank you. Thank you for being here. Have a good night,
Thank you
everyone.
all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Bye.
Thanks.